Professor stood before his class of 200 students, his three eyes scanning the lecture hall with practiced ease. The had taught at the Galactic Pedagogical Institute for over 4 centuries, and he knew his subject better than anyone alive. Today's lecture was on one of his favorite topics, the inevitable conclusion of all warfare. Conflict between sapient species follows predictable patterns, said, his voice translating instantly into 47 different languages through the neural implants each student wore. Throughout our recorded history of 40,000 years, we have observed the same outcomes again and again. He gestured to the holographic display behind him. Images of ancient battles filled the air, showing species that no longer existed, burned planets, empty star systems, the scars of wars that had consumed entire civilizations. All wars end in one of three ways, continued. First, diplomatic exhaustion. Both sides grow so weary of fighting that they negotiate a peace where neither truly wins. Second, resource depletion. The combatants simply run out of the means to continue fighting. Third, and most tragic, mutual extinction. Both sides destroy each other completely. The students took notes. Most of them had heard variations of this lecture before, but this course was required for anyone studying conflict resolution or military theory. His reputation as a scholar was known across 12 star systems. In the third row, 4 human students sat together. A young man with an interest in military history had been listening carefully for 3 weeks now. Next to him sat who studied how different species thought and behaved. Who focused on tactical studies sat on his other side. Behind them, training for the diplomatic corps took careful notes. The humans had been unusually quiet since the semester began. Other species students often asked questions or challenged the professor's points. The humans just listened and exchanged meaningful glances. The key principle, said, warming to his subject, is that no sapient species has ever achieved unconditional victory. It is psychologically impossible. When you fight an enemy, you fight until you cannot fight anymore, or they cannot fight anymore, or both of you cannot fight anymore. There is no other way. Shifted in his seat, he looked at who gave him a small nod, whispered something, leaned forward. Raised his hand. Noticed immediately. The human had been silent for 3 weeks, and now, during this particular lecture, he had a question. The professor felt a small flutter of curiosity. Yes, said, you have a question. Yes, professor, said, standing up as was customary in the institute. I'm confused about something you said. What about surrender? The word came through the translator, but something was wrong. The other students heard different things. The in the front row heard something like resource negotiation. The heard temporary cessation of hostility. The heard strategic withdrawal with dignity preservation. Translator AI flickered with uncertainty. The word surrender existed in the human language database, but it had no direct equivalent in any of the galactic common languages. The AI was struggling to find the right meaning. I'm sorry, said, his mandibles clicking in confusion. Could you clarify your question? The translation seems unclear. Frowned, he looked at his fellow humans. Surrender, he repeated. You know, when one side gives up and accepts the other side's terms, when you lose the war and admit you've lost. Now the translator was giving even stranger interpretations. Give up translated to something like temporary resource preservation strategy. The concept of admitting loss while still being alive to admit it didn't parse correctly. I don't understand, said slowly. If a side can still fight, why would they stop? If they cannot fight, then it's resource depletion. If they choose to negotiate, it's diplomatic exhaustion. What is this surrender you speak of? Stood up now. Professor, surrender is when you know you're going to lose, so you stop fighting to save lives. You accept defeat completely, even though you could technically keep fighting. The classroom erupted in confused chatter. Students turned to each other, their translators all struggling with this concept. A student raised a tentacle. That makes no sense, the said. If you can keep fighting, you fight. That's what sapient beings do. But why? Asked. If you know you're going to lose anyway, why waste more lives? Felt something strange happening in his mind. It was like trying to imagine a color that didn't exist. The human was describing something that should be impossible. A species choosing to stop fighting while they still had the capacity to fight, accepting complete defeat while still alive. In all of galactic history, said carefully, no species has ever done what you describe. When we fight until we physically cannot continue. It is the nature of sapient life. We have records going back 40,000 years, thousands of wars, hundreds of species. None of them surrendered in the way you describe. Really, said standing up now, that seems inefficient. Inefficient, a student sputtered. It's honorable, you fight until you cannot fight. But what if you could save millions of lives by just admitting you lost, said. Felt a headache forming behind his center eye. This didn't make sense. It couldn't make sense. The entire foundation of conflict theory, the basis of 40,000 years of study, was that sapient species fought to their limits, always, without exception. Do humans do this? Asked quietly. This surrender. All 4 human students nodded. All the time, said, it's normal for us. The classroom fell silent. 200 students from 47 species all stared at the 4 humans. His mind raced. If what they were saying was true, if humans could psychologically accept complete defeat and simply stop fighting, then what did that mean? Class dismissed, said abruptly. I need to research this. The students filed out, whispering to each other. The humans stayed behind for a moment. Did we say something wrong? Asked. Looked at them with all 3 eyes. I don't know, he said honestly. I truly don't know. That night lay in his rest chamber, but sleep would not come. His mind kept circling back to that word. Surrender. The concept that shouldn't exist. The idea that a species could choose to lose. What bothered him most was a creeping thought he couldn't shake. If humans could choose to lose, did that mean they could also choose to win? And what would that mean for a galaxy where no other species had that choice? He activated his data terminal at 3 in the morning. He had to know more. He had to understand what the humans had revealed. The word surrender glowed on his screen, taunting him with its impossible simplicity. The department occupied an entire wing of the Institute. Professor had never visited it before. He had never needed to. Language was just a tool for teaching, something the translator implants handled automatically. But now he stood before the department head, Professor, with a question that had kept him awake for 3 nights. You want me to confirm that a word doesn't exist? Asked, her crystalline form shimmering with amusement. Her species, were natural linguists. Their multiple resonance chambers could produce sounds in ranges most species couldn't even hear. Not just that it doesn't exist, said. I need to understand why it doesn't exist. The human students used a word, surrender. My translator couldn't handle it properly. I need to know if I'm missing something. Some amusement faded. She turned to her terminal and began running searches through the linguistic database. It contained over 12,000 languages from 2,000 species, living and dead. The search took less than a minute. Interesting, said softly. You're right. The concept exists in human languages. English, Korean, Mandarin, Spanish, and approximately 800 other human dialects all have words for this concept. But, she paused, running another search. No other species does. What do you mean, no other species? I mean exactly that, said. 2,000 species, 40,000 years of linguistic records. Not one other language has a direct equivalent. We have words for strategic withdrawal, temporary cessation, resource-based negotiation, even honorable death. But this concept of surrender, of complete capitulation while still possessing fighting capability, doesn't exist outside human languages. Felt his legs weaken. He sat down heavily. That's impossible. I thought so too, said, so I ran a deeper analysis. Let me show you. The holographic display activated. It showed a complex web of related concepts across different languages. When they want to end a conflict, explained, they negotiate a balanced cessation. Both sides agree they've fought to a point where continuing is inefficient. Notice, both sides must agree they're equally exhausted. Yes, that's normal, said. When they end a war, they perform a mutual recognition of resource limits. Both sides acknowledge they can't continue. Again, it's mutual. Both sides must be depleted. Of course, they have a concept called harmonious dissolution of hostility. It takes an average of 40 years to negotiate because both sides must agree that honor has been satisfied. Both sides claim victory, even if everyone knows one side lost more. Nodded, he had studied all of these. They were standard conflict resolution patterns. But surrender, continued, means one side says we lost, you won, we accept your terms while they could still fight. It's unilateral. It's an admission of defeat. She paused. It's something our psychology apparently can't produce. Our psychology, repeated. I consulted with the department, said. They've been running emergency analyses since you contacted me. They think this is bigger than a linguistic oddity. They think this reveals something fundamental about sapient cognition. Before could respond, his communicator chimed. It was Dean, the head of the entire institute. Professor, the dean's voice crackled. Please report to conference room 7 immediately. Bring the human students. An hour later, sat in the conference room with, and across from them sat Dean, Professor, and 3 members of the department. The humans looked nervous. Did we do something wrong? Asked. No, Dean said. The ancient scales were pale with stress. We need you to explain something. Professor, please ask your question. Looked at the 4 humans. Can you give me examples of surrender from human history? The humans looked at each other, spoke first. There are thousands, she said, but I'll give you some major ones. In 1945, Japan surrendered to end World War II. They could have kept fighting. They had soldiers, weapons, and resources, but they knew they would lose, so they surrendered unconditionally. Unconditionally, one of the psychologists, unnamed, leaned forward. They accepted complete defeat, just like that. Well, it took 2 atomic bombs, said. But yes, they surrendered, the war ended. What happened to them? Asked. They became one of Earth's most successful nations, said. Rebuilt their economy, became allies with the people who defeated them. The aliens in the room sat in stunned silence. Another example, said. Germany surrendered in 1945 as well. Unconditional surrender. They were fighting in their own capital city, but their leader had died, and they knew it was over. So they surrendered. And they survived too, Dean asked. Yes, Germany is now a leading nation on Earth. This is insane, said, his tentacles writhing in agitation. Don't you understand what you're describing? You're saying your species can psychologically accept total defeat and continue to exist. That shouldn't be possible. Why not? Asked. Because, stood up Packing. Because sapient species have a survival drive linked to their sense of self and honor. When you fight for existence. To surrender, to truly surrender, means accepting that your existence is worth less than your enemy's terms. It means psychological submission. Most species would rather die. But that's wasteful, said quietly. It's not about efficiency, snapped. Then he caught himself. I apologize, but you must understand. For us, for every species we know, fighting to the end is built into our psychology. We can negotiate when both sides are equally tired. We can withdraw when resources run out. But to simply give up while we can still fight, that breaks something fundamental in our minds. We're not broken, said a bit defensively. No, Professor said softly. I don't think you are. I think you're different, and we're trying to understand what that difference means. Dean activated a star chart. It showed the entire known galaxy, with dozens of red zones marking ongoing conflicts. The war, he said, pointing to one red zone. 187 years, 12 billion dead, both sides down to less than 10% of their original population, still fighting. Y asked, what are they fighting over? A mineral deposit on a border world, said, but that stopped mattering about a century ago. Now they fight because neither can accept loss. To stop fighting without mutual agreement would be unthinkable. They could surrender, said. They literally cannot, said. Their psychology won't allow it, none of ours will. Had pulled out her data pad and was typing rapidly. Professor, I'm looking at galactic conflict records. In the past 10,000 years, there have been over 800 major wars. How many ended with one side surrendering? Checked his own terminal. His scales went even paler. 0. They all ended in mutual exhaustion, resource depletion, or extinction. That's horrifying, whispered. That's normal, said, but his voice shook. Or at least we thought it was normal. The room fell silent. The weight of the revelation pressed down on everyone present. Finally spoke. So what you're telling us is that humans are the only species in the entire galaxy who can choose to lose. Yes, said. And every other species fights until they physically can't fight anymore. Yes. Looked at his fellow humans, then back at the aliens. Do you understand what that means for humanity? What do you mean? Asked. If we're the only ones who can surrender, said slowly, then we're also the only ones who can accept a surrender. We're the only ones who can offer terms. We're the only ones who understand the concept of limited war. The aliens stared at him. We're the only ones, continued, who know how to actually win. Felt his mind stretching, trying to grasp the implications. He failed. The thought was too big, too alien. He stood up abruptly. I need time to process this, he said. We all do, Dean agreed. This meeting is adjourned, but I want research teams assembled. We need to understand this fully. As everyone filed out, overheard whisper too. I can't believe they never figured this out. Whispered back, how could they? You can't miss what you've never had. Went home, he didn't sleep again that night. His mind kept showing him images of the war. 187 years, billions dead, still fighting. Fighting because neither side could do what humans did naturally. Fighting because surrender was impossible. The thought that haunted him most was simple and terrible. How many species had gone extinct because they couldn't do what humans found easy? Stopped teaching his classes. He sent messages to his students saying he was conducting important research. The truth was that he couldn't stand in front of a lecture hall and talk about conflict theory anymore, not when everything he knew was crumbling. For 2 weeks, he lived in the historical archives. The massive database contained records from 40,000 years of galactic history, but now wasn't looking at alien conflicts. He was diving deep into human records, trying to understand how one species could be so different. The first thing that struck him was how often humans fought. Earth history was filled with wars, thousands of them. They fought over land, resources, religion, ideas, and sometimes for reasons that seemed trivial to his mind. But what made him stop and stare at his screen was how these wars ended. The Punic Wars, Rome versus Carthage. After the Second War, Carthage surrendered. They gave up territory, paid massive tributes, and disbanded their military. They kept their city, their culture, and their lives. Read the terms of surrender 3 times. The Romans could have destroyed Carthage completely. They had the power, but they didn't. They offered terms, and Carthage accepted. It happened again and again throughout human history. The wars ended with France's surrender. Napoleon himself surrendered twice. His nation continued to exist. The American Civil War ended with the South's surrender at Appomattox. The defeated soldiers were allowed to go home. They kept their horses. Some became leaders in the reunited nation. World War I. Germany surrendered. Harsh terms, yes, but the nation survived. World War II. Japan and Germany both surrendered unconditionally. Both became prosperous allies of their former enemies within decades. Korea, Vietnam, countless smaller conflicts. The pattern repeated endlessly. One side would realize they couldn't win. They would surrender. Life would continue. Pulled up galactic records for comparison. He chose the war since it was still ongoing. Year 1, border dispute over mining rights. Both sides deploy military forces. Year 10, first planet rendered uninhabitable by orbital bombardment. Casualties, 2.3 billion. Year 50, both sides have lost over half their original military capacity. Fighting continues with increasing desperation. Year 100, partially destroyed. Fleet reduced to 20% strength. Both sides conscripting civilians for combat. Year 187, current status. Both species on the brink of extinction, still fighting. Nowhere in the records was there any mention of surrender. No peace offers that weren't mutual agreements. No unconditional terms. Just fighting, year after year, until one or both sides would be destroyed completely. Opened another file. The dissolution. Two factions of the same species fighting over philosophical differences. 300 years of conflict. Original population, 40 billion. Current population, 120 million, still fighting. He pulled up a dozen more conflicts. The pattern was always the same. Fight until you literally cannot fight anymore. Then he returned to human records. He found something that made his blood run cold. Ancient human civilizations had rules about surrender. The Romans had specific protocols for how an enemy could yield. Medieval Europe had elaborate customs about when and how a knight could surrender. Modern Earth had the Geneva Conventions, which included protections for those who surrendered. Humans had made surrender into a system. They had laws about it. They had honor codes about it. They built it into their way of war. Realized he was shaking. He activated his communicator. "Professor, I need you to verify something for me." The appeared on his screen. She looked tired. "What is it?" "Human fiction. Their entertainment. Do they make stories about surrender?" Was quiet for a moment. Then, "Yes, extensively. I've been analyzing their cultural database. They have movies, books, games, all featuring surrender as a major plot point. Sometimes the heroes surrender to save others. Sometimes the villains surrender when defeated. It's treated as normal." "Normal," repeated. The word felt strange in his mouth. "Are you all right? You sound unwell." "I'm fine, I just need to understand." He closed the connection. But he wasn't fine. He spent the next 3 days barely eating, barely sleeping, just reading. Human military manuals included chapters on how to accept surrenders. Human diplomatic training included negotiating surrender terms. Human children learned about famous surrenders in their history classes. It was so casual, so ordinary to them. Scheduled an emergency meeting with the Galactic Historical Concordance. It was the highest authority on galactic history, made up of the oldest and most knowledgeable scholars from 50 species. The council assembled in a vast chamber. Stood before them, his presentation materials ready. His hands trembled as he activated the display. "Honored Council," he began, "I have made a discovery that challenges our understanding of sapient conflict behavior." He showed them the human records. He walked them through battle after battle that ended in surrender. He demonstrated how human casualties in wars were often a fraction of what galactic conflicts produced. He explained the concept of unconditional surrender, conditional surrender, negotiated surrender. The council sat in stunned silence. High Historian of the finally spoke. "This is impossible. Sapient psychology does not work this way." "Human psychology does," said. and I've it across their entire recorded history, over 5,000 years of written records, hundreds of civilizations, all with the same pattern. But why? Another council member asked. Why would they develop this way? I don't know, admitted, but I know what it means for us. He brought up the current map of galactic conflicts, 14 major wars, hundreds of minor ones, all following the same pattern, fight until mutual exhaustion or extinction. How many of these conflicts could end if one side could surrender? Asked. How many billions of lives could be saved? The council erupted in argument. Some scholars insisted this was impossible, others demanded more research. A few simply sat in shock, their minds struggling with the implications. High Historian called for order. Professor, are you suggesting that we have been fighting wars incorrectly for 40,000 years? I'm suggesting, said carefully, that we have been fighting wars the only way our psychology allows, but there is another way. Humans found it, and we need to understand why we cannot. This is absurd, a scholar stood up. We fight with honor, we fight until victory or death. That is the way of sapient beings. That is the way of every sapient being except humans, corrected. And humans seem to survive their wars much more efficiently than we do. The meeting lasted 6 hours. By the end, the council had agreed to form an emergency research committee. They would study human psychology, neurology, and cultural development. They would try to understand why humans were different. Left the chamber exhausted, he headed home, planning to finally get some rest. He made it halfway before his legs gave out. A passing student found him collapsed on the walkway. He was conscious but unresponsive. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. Medical teams rushed him to the health center. The doctors examined him carefully. There was nothing physically wrong, but mentally something had broken. Cognitive overload, the chief medical officer explained to Dean. His mind is trying to reconcile two incompatible frameworks. Everything he built his career on, everything he believed about the nature of conflict has been undermined. His consciousness is fragmenting. And came to visit in the medical center. He lay in a rest pod, his 3 eyes unfocused. Professor said softly, "Can you hear us?" Center eye focused on her. "Why?" he whispered. "Why what, Professor? Why can you do it? Why can you surrender? What makes you different?" "We don't know," admitted. "We just can. It makes sense to us." "Nothing makes sense anymore," said. 40,000 years, 2,000 species, all of us fighting until we die, and you," he laughed a broken sound. "You just stop. You just choose to lose and keep living." "Is that bad?" asked. Closed his eyes. I don't know anything anymore. How many species died because they couldn't do what you do? How many are dying right now, fighting wars that could end tomorrow if they could just give up?" The humans had no answer. "The war," continued, his voice barely audible. 187 years. If one side could have surrendered after year 1, after year 10, after year 50, billions of lives, all because we can't think like you do. He opened his eyes again, looking at the 4 humans with something like fear. "What else can you do that we cannot?" he asked. "If you can surrender, what else is possible for you that's impossible for us?" Opened his mouth to answer, then closed it. He'd been thinking about that same question, and the answers he was finding terrified him. The medical officer ushered the students out. He needs rest. His mind needs time to rebuild its framework. Outside, the 4 humans stood in silence. "We broke him," said quietly. "We just asked a question," replied. "A question that destroyed his entire understanding of the universe," pointed out. Looked up at the stars visible through the medical center's dome. Somewhere out there, wars were raging. Wars that would continue until everyone involved was dead. Wars that could end tomorrow if the combatants could do what humans found natural. "We need to help them," he said. "How?" asked. I don't know yet, admitted. But we can't just leave them like this. If we're the only ones who understand surrender, maybe we're the only ones who can end their wars. The others nodded slowly. They had asked a simple question and broken a professor's mind. Now they had to figure out how to help heal a galaxy that had been fighting all wrong for 40,000 years. Professor spent 3 weeks in the medical center. The doctors used every treatment they knew, but his recovery was slow. His mind had to rebuild itself around a new understanding of reality. When he finally left, he was a changed being. His movements were slower. His 3 eyes held a sadness that hadn't been there before. But he was alive, and he was functional, which was more than could be said for several other scholars who had tried to fully grasp the implications of human surrender. 2 researchers had to be permanently retired after their study of human warfare gave them what their species called honor sickness. A philosopher had simply stopped speaking after reading about the Treaty of Versailles. The galaxy was struggling with this revelation. News of the surrender paradox had spread beyond academic circles. Governments were demanding answers. Military leaders were confused and frightened. The general population of most species refused to believe it was real. And in the middle of this chaos, the Galactic Council called an emergency session. They summoned and to appear before them. The council chamber was enormous. Representatives from 200 species sat in a circular arrangement, all focused on the small platform where the 4 humans stood. The humans had never felt so young or so alone. Counselor of the spoke first. His species was currently fighting the war. You claim your species can surrender, prove it. How asked, we're not at war with anyone. Explain how it works, Counselor of the demanded. Make us understand. Stepped forward. She had prepared for this. Surrender happens when one side recognizes that continuing the fight will only cause more death without changing the outcome. It's a rational choice. You weigh the cost of fighting against the cost of accepting your enemy's terms. But that's cowardice, said. To give up while you can still fight is to have no honor. Is honor worth more than the lives of your people? Asked quietly. The council chamber fell silent. What we're suggesting, said, is that there's a third option between victory and extinction. You can lose a war and survive. Your culture can continue. Your people can live. Impossible, Counselor said. If we accept terms, we cease to exist as. What are their terms? Asked. Looked surprised by the question. I don't know, they've never offered any, we've never asked. And what would your terms be for the asked? We would never offer terms, said. That would be admitting we cannot achieve total victory. Pulled up a data display. Your war has lasted 187 years. Your species population has dropped from 23 billion to 2 billion. They have gone from 30 billion to 2.5 billion. You're fighting over a mineral deposit that's worth maybe 1 trillion credits at current market value. She let that sink in. You've spent more on this war than that deposit is worth. You've lost more people than the entire current population of most species. And you're still fighting because neither of you can admit you've lost. We haven't lost, and said simultaneously. Then they glared at each other. Exactly, said. You're both still fighting. You'll both keep fighting until you're extinct. Unless. Unless what? Counselor Prime, the head of the Galactic Council, asked. The ancient being leaned forward with interest. Unless you let us help you stop, said. The council erupted in argument. The very idea was insulting to some species. Humans, who had been part of galactic society for less than 2,000 years, presuming to solve conflicts that predated their ridiculous. But Counselor Prime raised a hand for silence. Explain your proposal. Took a breath. We propose that humanity serve as neutral mediators for the conflict. We will facilitate negotiations for a surrender. Who surrender? Demanded. We don't know yet, admitted. We need to assess the military situation. understand what each side wants, and determine what terms are acceptable. I want the eliminated, said flatly. I want the to cease existing, added. Those aren't acceptable terms, said. Those are extinction demands. Surrender means you get to keep existing, just not as the winner. 3 weeks later, I arrived in the conflict zone aboard a human diplomatic vessel. Professor came with them. He wasn't fully recovered, but he insisted on witnessing this. He needed to see if humans could really do what they claimed. The war zone was horrifying. Dead worlds drifted in orbit. Debris fields from thousands of destroyed ships floated in the void. The remaining and fleets faced each other across a neutral zone, weapons armed, ready to continue a war that should have ended a century ago. The humans set up meetings with both sides separately. First, the fleet commander met them in a war room aboard the flagship that was old for his species from decades of combat. "You're here to make us surrender," he asked. "We will never surrender." "We're here to end the war," said. "That might mean you surrender, it might mean the surrender, but the war needs to end." "Why?" "Because you're dying," said bluntly. She showed him casualty projections. "At current rates, the species has 30 years left, they have maybe 40, then both of you are extinct." Looked at the numbers. "Then we die with honor." "Or you live without it," said. "Your choice." "What would surrender look like?" asked, surprising them. "You tell us," said. "What do you actually want from them?" Was quiet for a long time. "I want them to admit they were wrong. I want them to acknowledge that the border territory belongs to. I want them to stop fighting." "That's all?" asked. Yes, that's all," sounded confused by his own answer. "The mineral rights don't even matter anymore. Most of the deposit was destroyed in year 43. I just want this to end, but I can't. We can't just stop fighting." "Yes, you can," said. "If they surrender, you can accept it. The war ends, you win." The meeting with the went similarly. Fleet commander had the same haunted look as, when asked what he wanted, he gave almost the identical answer: acknowledgement, territory, and an end to the fighting. "You both want the same thing," told the negotiating team back on the human ship. "They want it to be over. They just can't make themselves stop." Over the next 3 weeks, the humans worked tirelessly. They drafted surrender terms. They held meetings with both fleets. They explained the concept of conditional surrender. You admit you lost, you accept certain terms, but you survive as a species and culture. The breakthrough came when asked both commanders the same question. If you could end this war tomorrow and save your people, would you? Both had said yes. Then let us show you how. The official surrender ceremony took place on neutral ground, a small moon that neither side controlled. Both fleets sent representatives and stood facing each other for the first time in decades. Spoke to them both. "This war started 187 years ago. Today it ends. Commander, your forces are smaller and more depleted. The assessment is clear. You cannot win. Will you surrender?" Every alien in the room held their breath. This was impossible. They could not possibly do what the human was asking. Commander looked at his crew. He looked at the human mediators. "I surrender," he said. The words came through the translator strange and new. "The fleet accepts defeat. We acknowledge sovereignty over the disputed territory. We request terms for the survival of our species." Stood frozen. In his entire life, no enemy had ever said those words. We, he looked at desperately. "What do I do?" "You accept their surrender," said gently. "You offer terms, you let them live." Turn back to, "The accept your surrender. Our terms, you withdraw from the disputed zone. You acknowledge our sovereignty. You agree to 50 years of non-aggression. Your species, your culture, your worlds, they all remain yours. The war is over." Legs nearly gave out. "We keep our worlds." "You lost the war, not your right to exist," said. It took 6 hours to finalize the details. Both sides kept expecting a trick, a trap, but the humans walked them through it. Surrender didn't mean extinction. It meant accepting that you lost and moving forward. When the treaty was signed, both commanders looked dazed. 187 years of war. Over in 6 hours, once someone had finally said the impossible word. Professor watched from the observation deck. He saw the fleets begin to withdraw. He saw crews that had been fighting for generations stand down their weapons. He saw species that should have gone extinct given a chance to survive. Found him there. "Are you okay, Professor?" Turned to him, his 3 eyes were wet. "You saved them. Just by asking that question in my class, you saved billions of lives." "We just showed them what they couldn't see themselves," said. "No," said. "You showed all of us. The news is spreading. Every conflict zone is watching. Humans ended a 2-century war in 3 weeks. Will other species learn to surrender?" asked. "I don't know," admitted. "Our psychology might not allow it, but we can learn to accept surrender from others. We can learn to offer terms instead of fighting to extinction. You've given us that much." Over the next 3 months, human mediators were requested in 14 different conflict zones. Not all negotiations succeeded. Some species still couldn't grasp the concept, but 8 major wars ended. 8 species-ending conflicts resolved through surrender. The galaxy was changing, and it was changing because 4 human students had asked a simple question about something they thought everyone understood. Returned to teaching. His first lecture back, he stood before his class and said, "Everything I taught you before was incomplete. Today we begin again, and today we have guest speakers." And walked in. The class of 200 students went silent. "These 4 humans," said, "are going to teach you something your species never learned naturally. They're going to teach you how wars can actually end." The students leaned forward, ready to learn something impossible. Ready to learn how to surrender. 6 months had passed since the surrender. Professor stood before his class again, but this time the room was different. News crews from 30 species lined the back wall. The Galactic Council had made this lecture mandatory viewing for all military academies. What the 4 human students were about to present would change everything. And sat at the front table. They looked older somehow, despite the short time. The weight of what they'd discovered had aged them. "Today's lecture," began, his voice steady but grave, "is about the implications of surrender. We've spent 6 months celebrating humanity's gift to the galaxy, the ability to end wars without extinction. But today, we must discuss the other side of this gift." He gestured to, "Please begin." Stood up, he activated the holographic display. It showed 2 military forces facing each other. "When we first explained surrender," said, "we focused on its defensive aspect, how it saves lives, how it preserves cultures, how it ends pointless conflicts, but surrender has another side, and we need you to understand it." He manipulated the display. One force attacked the other with overwhelming power. "Galactic species fight at 100% intensity," continued. "Always. When you go to war, you commit everything. You fight until you win, until your enemy is dead, or until you're both dead. There's no middle ground in your psychology." The class nodded. This was basic military theory. "Humans don't fight like that," said quietly. "We can fight at any level we choose, 10%, 50%, 90%. We can scale our warfare up or down based on our objectives." "I don't understand," a student said. "Why would you not fight with maximum force?" Stood up, "Because we don't need to. Let me explain with a historical example. In 1991, Earth fought a war called the Gulf War. It lasted 42 days. The enemy lost completely. But Earth didn't destroy their opponent's country, didn't eliminate their population, didn't take their territory permanently." "Then what was the point?" asked a student. "Limited objectives," said. "Earth wanted them out of Kuwait, that's all. So Earth used exactly enough force to achieve that goal, then stopped. The enemy surrendered, Earth accepted, war over. The class looked confused. "You're describing inefficiency," the student said. "Why not destroy them completely while you have the chance?" "Because we didn't need to," said Standing Now. "And here's what that means. Humans can fight a war for limited goals. We can defeat an enemy and let them survive. We can even fight multiple wars simultaneously at different intensity levels." She brought up a new display showing Earth's history. In the 1940s, humans fought a global war on multiple continents. Full intensity against some enemies, limited intensity against others. Different objectives for different theaters. After victory, humans rebuilt the nations they defeated. "That's," a student struggled for words, "that's terrifying." "Yes," agreed, "it is." Stepped forward. "Class, do you understand what they're saying? Other species fight until extinction because that's all we can do. Humans can choose when to start, how hard to fight, and when to stop. They can wage war as a tool rather than a survival imperative." The room went silent. The implications were sinking in. Stood last. His voice was somber. "There's something else you need to understand. Because we can surrender, we understand the concept of unconditional victory. We know what it means to win completely, and we know how to make an enemy surrender." He brought up military footage from human history, battles fought with precision, overwhelming force applied to specific targets, psychological warfare designed to break enemy will. "When humans wage war," said, "we don't just try to kill the enemy, we try to make them surrender. We have strategies specifically designed to break an opponent's will to fight. We can offer them the choice: surrender now and survive, or fight on and face destruction." A student raised a tentacle. "But that's warfare with a goal other than mutual destruction. That's control," finished quietly. "It's about control. Humans can control the scope, intensity, and duration of warfare. The rest of us cannot." Brought up a new image. It showed a complex chart of human military doctrine. "This is called proportional response," he explained. "Humans have a doctrine that says you match your military action to your political objective. If you want a small concession, you apply small pressure. If you want total victory, you apply total pressure. You scale it." In human military academies, added, officers study something called the spectrum of conflict. Everything from small raids to total war. Humans can operate at any level of this spectrum. Can any of your species do this? The class sat in stunned silence. No one answered because everyone knew the answer was no. "There's a human saying," said. "It's attributed to a military theorist named, 'War is the continuation of politics by other means.' For humans, war is a tool, not a death struggle, a tool." "That's why we can surrender," said. "Because we see war as something we do, not something we are. When the tool stops being useful, we put it down. We accept defeat because defeat is just a political outcome, not an existential threat." Looked at his students. Many looked frightened, some looked ill. "Now you understand," said, "why this discovery has terrified the Galactic Military Council. Humans are the only species that can truly win a war because they're the only species that knows when to stop fighting. And they're the only species that knows how to make others stop fighting." A student stood up, scales pale with fear. "Professor, are you saying that if humans wanted to, they could conquer the galaxy?" The room held its breath. All eyes turned to the four humans. Looked uncomfortable. "Theoretically, yes. We understand surrender, both giving it and receiving it. We can fight limited wars for specific objectives. We can scale our military force to match our goals. We can offer terms that seem reasonable to us but would be psychologically impossible for you to offer each other." "But we won't," said firmly. "That's not why we're here. We're here to help end wars, not start them." "Yet the capability exists," said softly. "That's what we must acknowledge. Humanity has a form of warfare that no other species possesses: the ability to wage limited war, the ability to achieve political objectives through controlled violence, the ability to win without destroying everything. Pulled up one final display. It showed galactic military statistics. Since humans began mediating conflicts 6 months ago, she said, galactic war deaths have decreased by 68%. 14 major wars have ended. Species that were doomed to extinction are rebuilding. By any measure, humanity's involvement in galactic conflicts has saved trillions of lives. And yet, continued, humanity has never fought a war in space, not against another species. Every conflict we've mediated, we've done through negotiation and understanding. We've shown you surrender can work. We've shown you wars can end without extinction. But said, we must also acknowledge what this means about humanity's military potential. The Galactic Military Council has run simulations. In every scenario where humanity goes to war with a galactic species, humanity wins. Not because they're stronger, because they understand war in a way we cannot. The class erupted in frightened chatter. The news crews in the back were transmitting this across the galaxy. This revelation would shake every government, every military, every citizen. Raised his hands for silence. But there's something else we must consider, something the council realized during their analysis. He looked at the four humans. Tell them your conclusion. Took a deep breath. The Galactic Council asked us to analyze humanity's threat level. They wanted to know if we were dangerous. And we realized something. We are dangerous, very dangerous, but here's the key point. He paused. We've been part of galactic society for 2,000 years. We've had advanced military technology for 1,800 years. We could have conquered vast territories. We could have subjugated weaker species. We could have built an empire. But we didn't, said. We chose to be peaceful. We chose to help instead of conquer. And now that we've revealed our understanding of warfare, we're choosing to use it to end conflicts, not start them. The question isn't whether humans can win wars, said. It's whether humans choose to fight them. And our history shows that we prefer peace when possible. The Galactic Council has proposed something called the Soul Accords, named after a city on Earth. It's a comprehensive treaty system that does several things. First, it establishes human mediators as neutral parties for all galactic conflicts. Second, it formalizes surrender protocols across all species. Third, it creates a framework for limited warfare with defined objectives. Most importantly, added, it includes humanity's promise to never wage offensive war against another galactic species. We will defend ourselves if attacked. We will mediate conflicts when asked, but we will not conquer. Stepped forward. The Galactic Council is voting on these accords in 3 days. Every major species has indicated they will sign, because they've realized something important. Yes, humans are the most dangerous military force in the galaxy, but they're also the only force working to reduce galactic violence. A long silence filled the room. Finally, a human student from the back row stood up. She hadn't been part of the original group, but she'd been following the lectures closely. Professor, she said, what happens if a species attacks humanity? What happens if someone tests whether we really will defend ourselves? Looked at in, that's an excellent question. Would you like to answer? The four exchanged glances, spoke carefully. Humanity has never lost a war in our entire history, he said. Not once, because we understand something fundamental about warfare. We know when to start. We know how hard to fight. We know when to offer terms. And we know when to accept surrender. He paused, his voice growing quieter but somehow more intense. If someone attacks us, we will fight back. But we'll fight smart. We'll fight with exactly the amount of force needed to end the conflict. We'll offer surrender terms. We'll give the enemy a way out that preserves their existence but ensures they won't attack again. And if they don't surrender, the student pressed, answered this time. Then we increase the pressure until they do. That's what unconditional surrender means. We make it clear that continued fighting leads to destruction, while surrender leads to survival. Eventually, they'll choose survival. That's psychological warfare, a student whispered. Yes, agreed. But it's psychological warfare designed to save lives, both theirs and ours. We don't want to destroy our enemies. We want them to stop being enemies. Looked out at his class. This is the new reality of galactic warfare. Humans have changed the equation. Wars can end without extinction. Conflicts can have limited objectives. And there exists a species that knows how to win completely while preserving both victor and vanquished. The lecture ended. The news crews transmitted the full session across the galaxy. Within hours, every government had seen it. Within days, the Soul Accords had been signed by every major species. Humanity took a permanent seat on the newly formed Galactic Conflict Resolution Council and graduated with the highest honors in the Institute's history. They were immediately recruited as chief negotiators for the council. Professor continued teaching, but his courses now included mandatory sections on human warfare doctrine. He had recovered from his mental breakdown, but he was forever changed. He had looked into the abyss of his species' limitations and come back with humility. 500 years later, historians would look back on this period as the turning point in galactic history. War deaths had declined by 99.7%. Dozens of species that would have gone extinct had survived and thrived. The galaxy had learned to surrender. And humanity, the species that could win any war, had chosen instead to end them. Long dead by then would have his final lecture quoted in every history text. They asked one simple question, a question we couldn't answer, and in our inability to answer, they found their purpose, not to conquer us but to save us from ourselves. The question that broke a professor's mind had healed a galaxy. All because 4 students wondered why no one else knew how to surrender.